SI-1 for all head full. Roger, SI-1, welcome home.
We've all heard that classic science fiction tale. A flying saucer lands on Earth, a green man steps out of his spacecraft, and utters those famous words, "Take me to your leader." And we always assume that he's taken to the White House or Buckingham Palace or maybe the Kremlin. But if you think about it, that story is rather human-centric. We have always assumed that we are the most successful species on this planet, that we represent the pinnacle of evolution. So it would seem only logical that a little green man will want to talk to the leader of humanity. But in reality, we are not the most successful species on this planet. Certainly if you use either population numbers or a variety of ecological niches exploited. Across all the known living taxa, that honor would probably go to the bacteria, which have been extraordinarily successful in colonizing this planet. But, you would argue, bacteria aren't animals. So what about within the animal taxa? Who has superiority there? Are humans at least the most successful of all animals? Again, it depends upon how you define success. But in terms of sheer numbers and species, the honor would probably go to the invertebrate phylum, Arthropoda, one of the first phyla to successfully invade the land. Today, we will talk about the various invertebrate phyla we find in the ocean and their extraordinary biodiversity. A majority of these will be important components of zooplankton, or animals who drift on ocean currents during at least some of their life history, if not their entire life. We will also review significant numbers of species that inhabit the benthic environment. The word benthic refers to the seafloor, and we will meet both infauna, that is, species living inside the sediment of the seafloor, and epifauna, or species living on the surface of the seafloor. We'll see that some benthic animals are mobile, while others are sessile, meaning they are fixed in one place. Finally, as we move up through the phylogenetic tree towards vertebrates, we will start to see animals capable of moving significant horizontal distances under their own locomotion. This, therefore, brings animals out of the zooplankton, the drifters, and firmly into the nekton, or marine animals who can swim independently of currents. For the sake of brevity, we will focus on key phyla and not review the entire panoply of marine invertebrates. We will also do this from an evolutionary perspective, beginning with the early ancestors of animals and moving up through the more recent clades. And this means we will start with a phylum that we're not even sure technically could be classified as animals. The sponges. Sponges belong to the phylum Porifera within a small subkingdom called the Parazoa, which translates literally to mean like animals. Classifying sponges presents somewhat of a challenge because they do not possess tissues or organ structures like an animal does, nor do they have a nervous system with which to investigate the environment, or even a circulatory system with which to circulate products and reactants of metabolism. They are nonetheless very prolific, sessile, benthic, epifaunal organisms, with somewhere over 5,000 species currently identified, found in almost all oceanic regimes, from the abyssal plain to the sublittoral and littoral zones. Sponges are suspension feeders, meaning that they feed on particles of food suspended in the water column. They do this using specialized flagellar arm cells called choanocytes that waft water through channels called ostia into the interior of the organism. In this way, choanocytes catch particles of food, typically bacteria and phytoplankton, and draw it into the body of the organism. Sponges have primitive endoskeletons that are reinforced with either silicon or calcium carbonate, depending on the species. Choanocyte structure in the calcium carbonate strengthened sponges bears a strong resemblance to a protist known as a choanoflagellate, from which we believe the animal kingdom evolved. As animals, or should we say parazoans, sponges are for the most part heterotrophic, and indeed a few sponges apparently are carnivorous. Now, that's nothing for us to get worried about, but they might take the odd tiny crustacean. As we shall see in a theme with most invertebrates and some vertebrate animals, sponges use a planktonic phase to distribute gametes and disperse other cells, which then can become new sponges. This is part of the secret as to why sponges are so widely distributed in our oceans. They hitch a free ride on ocean currents. A parallel group to the parazoans are the eumetazoans, the multicellular animals, where you will find all the other animals, including us. Truly multicellular organisms come with challenges of their own. Now that the body is more than one cell big, how do cells coordinate their activity? How do they make sure every cell gets what it needs to achieve successful metabolism? Multicellular organisms work around this problem by specializing certain cells into tissue types. Tissues go on to make organs, organs go on to make organ systems. For example, cells communicate with each other using the endocrine organ system, which consists of many organs or glands around the body. Each of these glands has within it certain cells specialized to secrete particular hormones, and so on. So key to all the animals we will review from now on will be this complexity and hierarchy of cellular organization. The first marine eumetazoan we should review are the cnidarians. All cnidarians possess a specialized form of cell known as a cnidocyte, or a stinging cell. A cnidocyte has the ability to send out a long organelle that can either attach itself to prey or inject a hypotoxin. Cnidaria can be broadly divided into three groups: the polyp-producing anthozoa, in which we would find corals and sea anemones, the medusozoa, which are the jellyfish, and then a third group, mixozoa, that is principally parasitic. Cnidarians, such as this one, are primarily radially symmetrical and have a relatively simple body design. Jellyfish are planktonic for a majority of their life cycle, but they do have a brief sessile stage. Anthozoans, on the other hand, are principally sessile, except for their planktonic dispersal phase. Feeding methods are similar across the phylum, whereby cnidocyte-armed tentacles catch and direct prey towards a mouth that opens into a gastrovascular cavity, a blind sac, which is essentially a cauldron of digestive juices. Waste is pushed out through the same mouth opening. Cnidocyte toxicity is variable. Most humans would probably not feel the sting of a sea anemone. However, the sea wasp, a type of box jelly, is widely recognized as the most lethal of all jellyfish, and it can be fatal to humans. I've had the dubious honor of actually being stung by a box jelly of some form. And although I am here to tell the tale, it was not at all pleasant, and I was still experiencing symptoms 30 days after the sting. What we think happened was that I was stung by a free-floating tentacle that had broken off the jellyfish after a storm. As I found out, tentacles can continue to sting long after they have become detached from the jellyfish. Before moving on to the next group of animals, it is worth briefly mentioning comb jellies. In spite of their name, comb jellies are not jellyfish, but belong to a separate phylum known as Ctenophora. They have a similar morphology to jellyfish. However, they lack stinging cells, and for locomotion, they have these rows of cilia that are spaced so close together that they scatter light like a prism. The effect is that when swimming, one sees a rainbow of colors beating along the row of cilia. In addition to this, many ctenophores are also bioluminescent, so visually they are quite stunning. We now leave radially symmetrical organisms and we move on to a group called the bilateria. These are organisms that are bilaterally symmetrical rather than radially symmetrical. This was an important evolutionary step as it gave an animal's body direction. Think about this. For a jellyfish, there's no left, there's no right, there's no front or back. Any direction is as good as any other. But a bilaterally symmetrical organism can have an anterior and a posterior, a left and a right. There is an orientation to the organism. And because the front end of the organism is more likely to encounter new aspects of the environment first, we can start to pack sensory systems at that end too, and perhaps some neural cells to help process that information. A concentration of neural cells can eventually lead to a brain. And while it would be a stretch to say that any of the early bilaterians had brains, as defined in the traditional sense, this was the pre-adaptation that led to that important organ. Our first bilaterians are various forms of worms, flat, round, and segmented. Flatworms from the phylum Platyhelminthes are divided into several classes. Most are parasitic, but those that are free-living are predatory in nature. Flatworms lack a circulatory system because, being flat, every cell in the worm's body is only a few cells away from open water. This means that, for the most part, a flatworm can rely on the natural process of diffusion to move metabolites around the body. However, their gut is similar to the jellyfish and anemones in that there is only one opening into the gastrovascular cavity. Free-living flatworms typically swim using undulations of their entire body, and they are traditionally found in a benthic habitat, either as epifauna or infauna. Parasitic flatworms, including tapeworms and flukes, inhabit a number of larger hosts, including whales. In their larval dispersal forms, all flatworms are planktonic. Roundworms, or nematodes, are an extremely successful and diverse group that again have exploited pretty much every niche available in our ocean. Some can be found as plankton, others as part of the infauna of the benthos, where they are extraordinarily common and play a crucial role in the decomposition of organisms that have sunk to the sea floor. Together with the bacteria, roundworms are responsible for the breakdown of complex organic molecules to simpler products that then can be taken up as nutrients by primary producers. Of interest, roundworms are the first animals we have encountered thus far to actually have a rudimentary intestinal tract with a separate mouth and anus. This is a feature that we shall see in the rest of the animals from here on. And then finally, segmented worms, or annelids, are another very successful group of organisms that occupy many niches within the ocean, typically benthic. Most of the marine representatives in this phylum belong to the class Polychaeta. Representative polychaetes include the sessile fanworms and the tube worms, both of which are suspension feeders. The majority of the body remains in the sediment within a tube that the animal builds, while the head sticks out, extruding a fan-like structure that wafts in the current and captures small particles of food. Other polychaetes, such as bristleworms, ragworms, and scaleworms, are more mobile, living either on or in the benthic sediments. An important innovation in this phylum is segmentation. All annelids, on close inspection, consist of a series of segments. This can easily be seen in an earthworm, for example, a non-marine annelid. Segmentation is useful in the development of evolution of body design. It allows one to create a basic body structure that is then repeatable, but then beyond that, it allows one to specialize certain regions of the body. Like the tubular gastrointestinal tract, segmentation is a theme that will be seen in the remainder of animals we will talk about today. Turning from the various marine worms, we come to the next phylum, Mollusca. Species in this phylum are highly diverse, ranging from the tiniest of nudibranchs, essentially a marine slug, measuring a few millimeters in length, to the colossal squid, over 10 meters in length and 500 kilograms in mass. Mollusks are in every environmental niche to be found in the ocean. Their larval forms make up a substantial portion of the plankton, and in their adult form, they can survive the intertidal, the sublittoral, the abyssal plains, and the deep sea trenches. Major classes within the mollusca include the gastropoda, the bivalvia, and the cephalopoda. Among the gastropods are a number of single-shelled organisms, such as the limpets and the abalone, as well as more naked species, such as the nudibranchs, the sea hares, and the sea butterflies. The bivalvia include those organisms with two shell halves, such as clams, mussels, scallops, and razor shells. And the cephalopods include the octopus, squid, and nautilus. Despite their highly diverse forms, all mollusks have an organ known as the mantle. If the mollusk has a shell, and not all mollusks have shells, then the mantle is responsible for its formation, which is done through a biomineralization process that takes carbon dioxide dissolved in the water column and converts it to carbonate in much the same fashion as corals do. Unfortunately, under acidic conditions, this process is reversible, and many scientists are concerned that ocean acidification will prevent mollusks from building strong shells and will therefore make them more prone to predators. Mollusks, like most marine segmented worms, get their oxygen through gills. They also have a primitive circulatory system and a heart to pump fluid through that system, although we would term the system open. This means there are very few pipes or vessels leading circulatory fluid one direction or another. Instead, the animal has a large internal cavity, referred to as a hemocoel, that bathes the internal organs in that fluid. And because that fluid is mostly water and therefore incompressible, the hemocoel also acts as a hydrostatic skeleton. Perhaps the best way to think about the hydrostatic skeleton is to imagine a water balloon. When one squeezes one end of the balloon, not too hard, we don't want it to burst, the other end expands out. Thus, by contracting muscles around various parts of the hemocoel, the mollusk can move around. This is particularly important in the cephalopods, where the mollusk's foot has evolved instead into tentacles and suckers, and the squirting of water is used as a kind of jet propulsion. Feeding in the mollusks is also highly diverse. Many mollusks have radulas, a roughened tongue-like structure rather like a metal file. In herbivorous species, the radula is used to scrape food from a surface. In some of the more predatory species, the radula has been converted into a drill, allowing them to burrow into the shell of other mollusks with the assistance of acidic saliva. In the cone snails, the radula has been modified into a tiny harpoon laced with a venom that can actually be deadly to humans. So be really careful what you pick up on the beach. There is one cone snail that is commonly referred to as a cigarette snail, because apparently, once stung, you only have time for one cigarette before you die. In this particular case, it's not the cigarette that kills you. Bivalves do not have a radula. Instead, they filter feed using a pair of siphons to bring water into the organism and back out. Within the organism, the water flows over the gills, oxygenating the circulatory fluid. However, in bivalves, the gills are not just responsible for gaseous exchange. The gills are also coated with a mucus that traps food particles. Tiny cilia that line the gills then push food towards the stomach. The nervous system of a mollusk is quite well developed. For example, it allows a bivalve to sense an approaching predatory sea star and effect an emergency escape, consisting of a sudden clapping together of the two valves that creates a jet of water pushing the organism away from the encroaching threat. However, the pinnacle of neural development in the mollusks is in the cephalopods, the squid and the octopus. I remember the first time I saw an octopus underwater. It was quite unnerving. No bigger than my hand, this thing was quite clearly looking back at me, meeting my stare with a challenging stare of its own. I soon discovered that octopi are quite intelligent. I remember when I was younger working in an aquarium that kept a giant Pacific octopus. Part of my duties was to feed this animal. Getting into its tank was like getting into Fort Knox. There are a number of latches and doors protecting the open part of the tank. Initially, I thought this was to keep the humans out of the tank. I soon learned it was in fact to keep the octopus inside the tank. Every time it learned how to open one of the doors or the latches, another barrier had to be added. In the early days before the aquarium staff had figured it out, quite a few prize fish went missing. It turned out the octopus was quite capable of visiting other tanks for a free meal before they figured out extra security was needed. Before leaving the mollusks, I would be remiss if I did not mention the squid. Also cephalopods, squid can form schools that can be a valuable source of food for other animals, especially marine mammals. However, at least two species of squid are more solitary and can gain enormous size. These are the giant squid, Architeuthis, and the colossal squid, Mesonicoteuthis. These squid live at such depths that they rarely have been seen alive. All the specimens we have are ones that have either washed up on the shore dead or were caught in fishing nets. In 2007, a colossal squid was caught in Southern Ocean waters as bycatch to the Patagonian toothfish fishery. This massive animal weighed half a metric ton and was over 11 meters long. In our review of mollusks, you will see that while they do have mobility, for the most part it is confined to movement across the benthos, although the cephalopods are a clear example of nekton, free-swimming species that are independent of currents. That said, pretty much all mollusks enjoy some time in their larval stages as zooplankton. We are starting to see how important zooplankton are as a life stage for so many marine animal phyla. Our next phylum is Arthropoda, which means jointed foot. Arthropods have taken the principle of segmentation to extremes. Within the arthropod body are regions that we refer to as the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Each of these regions is made up of segments, each with the potential for a pair of appendages that can be highly specialized. Let's think about this a little by taking a classic crustacean or arthropod, the American lobster. In this species, the head and the thorax have fused to form the cephalothorax. In the adult form, at the anterior end of the cephalothorax, the appendages have modified into antennae and other mouthparts such as claws or chelicpeds that are used principally for defense and to catch prey. Smaller arms called maxillipeds that can grab food, and mandibles that can be used to process and chop the food. In the thorax, the appendages form pairs of walking legs, known as periopods. And in the abdomen, the appendages have been modified to become swimming legs, or pleopods. All arthropods have a jointed, hard exoskeleton reinforced with chitin. As the phylum name suggests, their limbs are articulated and thus capable of very fine, delicate motor movement. However, their hardened exterior limits growth. So arthropods must molt their exoskeleton from time to time. A new, temporarily softened exoskeleton awaits beneath and expands with the quick growth of the arthropod following the molt, and then it hardens. Marine arthropods range in size from the microscopic, and therefore typically planktonic, through to the 4-meter leg span of the Japanese spider crab, an absolute monster. That's 2 times the width of the span of my arms. Marine arthropods come from 2 clades. The first of these, the Chelicerata, have a pair of modified mouthparts known as chelicerae that are used to hold food. This group would include the sea spiders and the horseshoe crabs. By the way, sea spiders, in spite of their name, are very unlike traditional terrestrial spiders and are seen far more crab-like in their appearance. Both horseshoe crabs and sea spiders have a benthic lifestyle, foraging on various invertebrates, and horseshoe crabs at least appear to belong to a very ancient order that dates back almost 500 million years. Their larvae are, of course, planktonic. The second marine arthropod clade are the crustaceans, a large taxonomic group that contains almost 70,000 species. This subphylum contains a large range of classes, but I'll highlight just two here. The Maxillopoda includes the copepods and the barnacles, and the Malacostraca include the crabs, the lobsters, krill, shrimp, and amphipods. Both of these classes are planktonic in their larval form. Some, such as krill and certain copepods, are planktonic throughout their entire life history. Let's look at some of these crustaceans in a little bit more detail. If one was to tow a plankton net using a mesh size of around about 250 microns, that's about 1/4 of a millimeter, most of the single-celled phytoplankton in the water would escape, allowing us a good view of the multicellular zooplankton. Depending on where you perform the tow, copepods would most likely dominate your sample. There are around 10,000 known marine species. Not all are planktonic in their adult form. Some are benthic. Nonetheless, as a group, they constitute an incredibly important trophic link between phytoplankton and the marine carnivores. They have a very characteristic morphology, and so they're easy to identify down to family. However, finer resolution classification requires a lot of hard work using a microscope, looking at the details of antenna length, ratios of cephalothorax to abdomen length, and so on. Some copepod species form an essential part of diet for larger organisms. For example, the North Atlantic right whale feeds almost exclusively on a copepod known as stage 5 Calanus finmarchicus, the stage being a reference to a particular life stage associated with molting. Calanus copepods are some of the largest copepods you will find, approaching the size of a piece of short-grained rice. Thus, a right whale must eat millions of them in the course of a lifetime. We have already talked extensively about krill in another lecture, so let's move next to crabs, lobsters, prawns, and shrimps, all of which belong to the order Decapoda, meaning 10-legged. Crabs and lobsters are benthic in their adult form, but planktonic in their larval form. As plankton, they are often easily identified by a disproportionately large rostral spike that extends forward from the organism. This reduces in later molts, but still can be seen in many of the adult forms. Many decapod species in their adult form are a basis for a human food fishery. Turning from the arthropod phylum, we come to the last exclusively invertebrate phylum, Echinodermata, which translates literally to spiny skin. This group contains the sea stars, the brittle stars, sand dollars, sea urchins, and sea cucumbers, as well as sea lilies. Echinoderms are an exclusively benthic marine phylum, and they can be found anywhere from the intertidal down to the abyssal plain. Of interest, in the echinoderms, we see a return to radial symmetry in the adult form. Actually, a specific kind of radial symmetry, known as pentaradial symmetry, one based on units of 5. If one looks at the sea urchin, it consists of 5 curved plates under that spine, under those spines, that fuse together to form the body. These are the same 5 plates that are readily observable in the sand dollar and in a transverse cross-section of a sea cucumber. All echinoderms have a planktonic dispersal phase, and those larvae are bilaterally symmetrical, justifying their classification within the bilateria. Perhaps one of the most interesting innovations in the echinoderms are its internal hydraulics, known as the water vascular system, that makes use of a network of canals filled with water. Using muscles to constrict parts of those canals forces water down towards the distal end of the canals, known as tube feet. In this way, the hydraulic system can be used to move the organism and help it cling to prey. And so we come to our end of our brief review of the wholly invertebrate phyla. There are a few themes here that I want you to remember. First, it's important to appreciate the incredible diversity we have seen, ranging from sessile to mobile, from herbivorous to carnivorous, from free-living to parasitic, from hydrostatic skeletons to endoskeletons to exoskeletons, from microscopic to literally colossal. Second, consider the importance of zooplankton as a life stage for many of these organisms. The term zooplankton is fairly generic, but in reality it comprises hundreds of thousands of species and hundreds of millions of individuals, most of them invertebrate. Now think about how important the zooplankton must be trophically as members of the food web. Third, it's important to accept our own biases as humans. When I say the word animal to you, it will be perfectly natural to think of a dog or a gorilla or a parrot. If I were to say the word marine animal to you, you would probably think fish or turtle or whale. But these are all vertebrates, and you thought of them probably because you are a vertebrate yourself. But in reality, the majority of the animal life is invertebrate, and that lack of a backbone does not make them any less ecologically important. So, in this course about oceans, let's celebrate the marine invertebrates. They are by far the most important animals in the ocean. Without them, we simply would not exist.